Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our California ISO Price Formation Enhancement meeting. Today, our stakeholder meeting will be an initiative update, and we have a lot of information to provide. My name is Brenda Corona, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group at the California ISO. I'm also joined by James Verdesh from the Policy Group and Juan, who's also from the Stakeholder Engagement Team, and also my manager, Keone, who will be also here to assist. Our event producer today is Michelle, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them through the chat. But before we get started, we want to go over this call that is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As we are starting off this reminder, we want to let you know that this is not a working group, this is an initiative update. So in this specific meeting, we are allowing any questions or comments to come in from everyone. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand icon, and we will go ahead and announce those instructions here. As if for everyone that's virtually participating, we have the #2 as the dial information. And also for those who are WebEx only, please use the raise hand icon that's located in the middle section of your screen. Before stating your name, please be sure to state your affiliation before addressing your comment. And also for those who are submitting through chat, please also add your affiliation so we know who's speaking. And then also for the any questions, just feel free to send them over to our panelist group and we will be able to review them as well. So we encourage any questions throughout the presentation, and then we will go ahead and review this quick stakeholder initiative process of where we're at. So currently we are in the beginning phases of proposal development. We have posted the issue paper back in July 12, 2022. And also we plan to take notes and reports for each working group meeting. And my colleagues here will be sure to address those timelines and the next few slides. So at this time, we are currently in the very beginning stages of the proposal development. Our target is to do a straw proposal later on, but this time we only posted issue paper. And now I'll go ahead and introduce James. He will go ahead and present on the next few slides. James?
Thank you, Brenda. Let's go to slide 5. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. So we have sort of two objectives here in this meeting. First is to provide an update on the Price Formation Enhancements Initiative in terms of the schedule, but also in terms of the formation of working groups, which the ISO plans to do to foster better stakeholder engagement in this process. And so we'll sort of give updates on both of those fronts and allow for some questions and comments to come in. But first, we want to explain that the Price Formation Initiative is going to establish several stakeholder working groups, some of which you may be familiar with, and other stakeholder initiatives. You may have seen them in the EDAM policy process. They're ongoing in the Interconnection Process Enhancements initiative, and we're planning to do the same here for price formation. And really the goal of these stakeholder working groups is to foster transparency and trust between the ISO and stakeholders, ultimately to enhance the quality of the policy that we put forth in these market design initiatives. So we think, several objectives of these working groups is to enable stakeholders to participate in a more active way earlier in the process to help form and justify problem statements and guiding principles for each initiative as we move forward into the policy development. We want to promote a sense of shared ownership in the policy to build collective commitment between stakeholders in the ISO, and a sense of shared ownership in the policy because stakeholders are engaged earlier in the process and have, a sense of collective ownership over the policy. And of course, also to foster mutual trust, encouraging a more collaborative policy development process will ultimately lead to more successful outcomes. So we want to take in, again, we want a policy process that's responsive to diverse perspectives of stakeholders, and we think that adding these types of working groups early in the process can help us sort of kick off these initiatives on the right foot and allow stakeholders a more active role in participation than they may have in the past. So that's the announcement. We'll get into more details about what the working group structure will look like and the timing, but let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about schedule. So this schedule sort of outlines a few different things related to the timing of what we want to do in price formation. The first thing that we have to recognize is that the price formation enhancements has many different scope topics within the umbrella of price formation, and you can see them on the upper row of the slide, and they're sort of broken out into several phases. And we took the feedback that we got from the issue paper back in July of 2022, and we asked for stakeholder comments about how stakeholders perceived the highest priorities that the ISO should work on. And what we recognize is that each of these topics themselves are quite technical, they're complicated, the issues and solutions will be intense, and it would not be possible for the ISO or stakeholders to sort of be considering all of these topics at one time. And so we decided that we've had to sort of stagger a bit in terms of the phasing of these topics, and have decided upon the phases that you see on the screen. So what you can see is sort of I call it a waterfall structure, in which there'll still be cohesiveness in the price formation efforts overall, in the sense that we will kick off the next phase sort of in the policy development process is still going in the earlier phase. And that's intentional so that we can sort of break up, not have too much going on at one time, so stakeholders and the ISO staff can be, properly focused and engaged. But at the same time, all of these price formation aspects have synergies and cohesiveness. And in that sense, we don't want to get too far on the first phase, for example, or before thinking about how it's going to impact phases 2 and 3. And so because of those synergies, there are parts of the process that sort of overlap. And you'll notice that in these blocks, there's no dates necessarily associated with these blocks. This is just a sort of a visual representation of how, we imagine the phasing will flow here. So what you can see is for phase 2, if you focus in on phase 2 in the center of the screen, you'll see, working group preparation beginning after some time has passed after the straw proposal for phase 1 is produced. And so and same for phase 3, where working group preparation for the phase 2 items would begin shortly after the straw proposal is produced for phase 2. So again, that's intentional to create some cohesion to the topics, but at the same time, not having us have to work on all of these technical topics at one time, which would just be overwhelming for everybody. So let's focus in a little bit on phase 1, because these are the topics that we'll start with. And so the 3 phase 1 items that we'll talk about first are scarcity pricing, BA level market power mitigation, and fast start pricing analysis. So let's kind of go through each of these one by one. We talked about scarcity pricing a bit in the issue paper, and stakeholders seem to have recounted that scarcity pricing was among the higher priority items. And so we decided to put scarcity pricing first. But combined with scarcity pricing, a lot of stakeholders' feedback was that we don't want to talk about scarcity pricing without also considering market power mitigation sort of together. So it's sort of combined as sort of a cohesive topic, the scarcity pricing and BA level market power mitigation topic into phase 1. Now, the BA level market power mitigation topic is a bit of an extension of EDAM in the sense where we deferred from the EDAM policy process to price formation, whether or not to consider BA level market power mitigation for the EDAM, and also some various grouping approaches that we could use to group BAs together to make the mitigation more accurate. So we'll consider that sort of hand in hand with scarcity pricing. We also want to point out that in terms of fast start pricing, there's actually two different tracks here. First, there's an analysis track, which we will be starting here in phase 1, followed by a policy track, which will kick off in phase 2. And so stakeholders that have been participating in the price formation process to date will have recalled a series of workshops that we did last fall and maybe one earlier this year, where we talked about price formation principles. We had some educational sessions about price formation and how it works generally. And we also did a session about a little bit more on fast start pricing in particular. And one of the things that the ISO sort of took away from those working groups or those workshops is that we can talk about in terms of policy and implementing fast start pricing into our markets, but what stakeholders seem to be yearning for is some analytics behind fast start pricing generally. So a few questions about what would the impact of fast start pricing be under different sensitivities, different types of assumptions. So we might look at things like how might that change energy LMPs, or how might that be expected to change bid cost recovery for certain units, things of that nature. And so, but the intention of phase 1 in terms of fast start pricing is to get into some analytics to support and to elaborate on what the potential impacts of fast start pricing might be, so that when we move into the second phase, we have that justification about what the impacts are looking like to inform the policy. And so I do want to be clear that that does not necessarily mean that none of the other topics within price formation will have a lack of analytics. We certainly, through the working group process, can reveal, what sort of analysis stakeholders are looking for to inform the straw proposal for all of these items. But we just thought, particularly for fast start pricing, there was an opportunity to really be intentional about that analysis piece. And so what you'll notice in phase 1 is that the outcome of the fast start pricing in phase 1 is not a straw proposal, but it's an analysis. We'll call it a report or document, to sort of document through the working group process the type of analysis stakeholders want to see as we move into phase 2. So the fast start pricing, as we move into phase 2, that's when we start working on fast start pricing policy as informed by the data analysis. We'll have another series of working groups on fast start pricing whose job will essentially be to collaborate on that data analysis and to deliberate on that and to discuss any policy we want to undertake for fast start pricing as a response. Another topic in phase 2 that we want to talk about is this idea of potentially looking at the FRP product in some, making some tweaks to the FRP product, because really what we're trying to get at in phase 2 is looking at, do our market prices incentivize and properly compensate resources for flexibility and other sort of, attributes that they bring to the system, and are they being compensated for that appropriately? And so fast start pricing is one of those ways that we look at, and other ways could be, looking at the FRP product. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Perhaps they can work together in sort of companion policy, but this has been sort of a long recommendation of the Department of Market Monitoring for us to take a look at the FRP product, and so we're going to take that up in phase 2, and we'll have separate working groups for that, separate straw proposals for those phase 2 items. And then finally, for phase 3, we talked about in the July 2022 issue paper some discussion about the multi-interval optimization and impacts to storage resources. And we decided to take that up into the phase 3 items because for a couple of reasons. One, there are other storage initiatives going on. And of course, we want to make sure that we have the priority set so that there's not too much in any given topic going on at one time, so stakeholders can be engaged in and focused on one thing at a time. But to take some of those items from phase 2 and phase 1 and sort of look at how that interplays with storage and within the multi-interval optimization in phase 3. So we take up those issues there. Finally, one of the sort of overarching themes of the price formation issue paper was this idea that we're sort of preparing for nodal ancillary services and procurement of nodal AS in our markets, which can enable some improvements in our price formation as it relates to scarcity pricing as sort of a long-term goal that we're looking at. And there may be policy within price formation we could look at to facilitate, prepare for nodal ancillary service procurement to take advantage of any scarcity pricing benefits we could get out of that. So that's sort of how these things are staged. If there's any questions on the schedule or on the structure, I can take them now.
Okay, let's go ahead and call on Alva first for PG&E.
This is Alva Svoboda from PG&E. I'm guessing you can hear me? Great.
Yes.
So this seems like a reasonable way to plan out these phases, but the impressions from the meetings was not quite the same set of priorities in my mind. And so I wonder if you can support a little bit better, like with numbers or with the fast start pricing did not seem to be a high priority item at all. And it seemed to me that there were storage participants who were quite concerned about the question of whether they were getting proper cost recovery in real time. So I'm just curious about the numbers or how you're assessing that a little bit more with a little bit more meat on the bones as to how you made this particular set of this prioritization that you've determined on.
Sure. So first is that storage, of course, melds within all of these topics, and all of these topics sort of have unique impacts on storage resources that we'll, of course, consider. And we'll have Gabe Murtaugh, who's our storage sector manager, participating in these meetings to make sure that we're keeping an eye on impacts to storage as we move along. As it relates to sort of the multi-interval optimization challenges, we back in October, I believe it might have been October of either 2022 or 2021, we had a presentation by ISO staff to the Market Surveillance Committee talking about the multi-interval optimization and issues with storage and sort of why certain outcomes sort of play out. And yes, while we do think that we want to, take a look at what, if there can be improvements made there, we sort of decided to move it into the third phase because there didn't seem to be, some of the feedback from stakeholders were that, the multi-interval optimization works just fine. We don't want people to touch it, or we don't want the ISO to touch it, but we still want to work out how these solutions, how we can potentially make some solutions to, if there's adverse outcomes specifically for storage resources, we want to look at that. Now, some of those things could actually play out in some of the earlier topics. For example, scarcity pricing will have some storage specific elements within that, we imagine, where we're going to be looking at whether the incentives of our market provide, or the prices of our market provide storage the right type of incentives to, participate the way we hope they would during tight system conditions, things like that. But there's one more part of this, which is that, we don't have the entire ISO policy scope on this sort of waterfall slide, but there's also some concern that we have other types of storage policy planned in the near term that we just felt like if we were to sort of take it all on at once, that we would leave staff and stakeholders a little overwhelmed. So that's what I've got to say on storage. If you have any feedback or reaction to that, please let me know.
Well, the only thing I would say is I do think it's an important topic, and I think it's potentially the way you've just described it leaves a venue that if people think it's important enough, it could be moved into a nearer term energy storage enhancements project. I felt there was a bit of, sort of saying, well, this is going to go into the pricing. And there were people who had ideas, and I don't think this is by any means an area where there's been any, determination what the solution is. But I did think that it was the costs that you pointed out were pretty significant. And so it just seemed like possibly there needs to be a change in the actual storage model, or or a change in the, as you pointed out, which is a higher risk, which is in the multi-interval optimization itself. And those are activities that are going to be hard to really get underway in the framework that you've posted here. It sounds to me like you've gone through pretty carefully and decided what your priorities are, but I hope that if other, and I'm not speaking for anyone else, so if the priorities are different for others, I hope that you'll consider how to fit that in. Again, the big outlier for me is why so much effort is being put on fast start pricing, because you could potentially move that out later and potentially get more traction on other things which people have expressed real concern about. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thanks, Alva. And so this is the purpose of these meetings, to discuss, this is sort of the plan that we've laid out. And of course, we're intend to be responsive to feedback, and it could very well be the case that priorities change over time. And, if needed, these things could sort of be moved around, but we just wanted to present a framework, so that people can sort of chew on something and give us some feedback. I see Gabe, before moving to Perry, I did see Gabe's hand pop up in the attendees list. So I'd like to ask if Gabe had any follow-up to Alva's comments.
Hey, thanks. Can you hear me, James?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, Alva, I think you've hit on a few things, and, we've had a few internal conversations about this, some of the questions that you've been asking. So I do think that these are relevant, and they, I think they could potentially come up in some of the working group discussions that we're planning to have. I would just remind everybody that we are planning to kick off a storage modeling enhancements initiative later this year. I think this, the storage modeling enhancements initiative is going to be a very similar framework to what James is outlining here for this policy. It's obviously not going to get into, how markets are pricing storage resources. That's a topic for this policy, but that will be an area where we could potentially address some of the modeling concerns that we have with storage resources. And we've been fielding questions about, storage resource participation in general, and I think that's the right venue to kind of have those discussions about how we improve the modeling in general.
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, it sort of, to summarize, it does sort of, what's sort of missing from the slide is a sort of view about sort of the storage policy played out over time, and so as Gabe indicated, we're trying not to bite off more than we can chew, and so we thought we'd sort of phase it where we'd have sort of the storage modeling and enhancements policy go first, and then get into some of these topics on the multi-interval optimization. Let's go to the next caller.
Hey, this is Perry.
Your line is unmuted.
Hey, Perry Servideo, GDS Associates. Just a quick question about phase one here. I see that the conduct working groups in phase one spans all three of the phase one topics. I know that we've already had a working group or two on the fast start pricing. I was curious if you anticipate more working groups on fast start pricing, or has that already been played out in this phase?
So we'll get a little into that in the next slide, but to preview, we are planning to, so first I'll distinguish a little bit between what we're calling working group in this context of this slide from what we had done a few times earlier in the year and late last year in terms of holding those workshops, because the working groups are intended to be a little more collaborative in the sense that, you know, those workshops were sort of, I'd call them more or less educational, and that was the intention. We were trying to get stakeholders sort of up to speed with some of the foundational elements and principles so that when we move into the actual, you know, working groups and policy development, you know, we have that background in our back pocket to work off. So the working group structure won't be like necessarily the ISO spending 3 hours going through examples like we did in those workshops, but kind of more of a collaborative process. But what we will do is sort of, if you remember, and I know you do because GDS Associates actually put together a scarcity pricing report that we linked to from earlier, I think it was in July of last year, where we sort of solicited some presentations and materials from stakeholders to present on. That's exactly the type of stuff that we'll be doing more of in the working group process is asking, you know, folks to be presenting their perspectives on, you know, what should the ISO be working on, what should its priorities be, and the principles be, forming these problem statements so that we sort of can go into the proposal less of the ISO saying, well, here are the issues that we see, and we're going to work on those in the straw proposal, but allow that to be sort of more of a collaborative process. So hope that answers your question. I'll defer the rest of it to the next slide.
Sure. Okay. I'll wait for the next slide, but that was a good explanation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lindsay, you are next. Let's go ahead and unmute Lindsay from NV Energy.
Hi, Lindsay Schlickaway from NV Energy, and I'm sorry if you've already explained this, but I was hoping you could go into some detail on what you are going to consider for replacement reserves and preparing for nodal AS. Is this something that would apply for EDAM participants, or is this just an ISO only enhancement?
Yeah, potentially it could. So the general concept of replacement reserves may be consideration of a sort of a longer response, like 30-minute reserve product that facilitates, you know, when the ISO has to, or when the market has to use contingency reserves in response to some sort of contingency event, there's a process for sort of replacing those reserves with something else on the market. And other ISOs do have 30-minute reserve type products for this function, and there's some thought that it may be beneficial in the longer run to have, you know, the California ISO market have a replacement reserve type product in combination with, you know, moving towards a nodal AS product in EDAM. Now, I will say that we're not 100% clear. The slide does say preparing for nodal AS. We don't think that price formation will be the venue with which we discuss nodal AS and develop a policy for that. I think that might be more like an EDAM 2.0 or some other type of forum where, you know, if we move to nodal AS, of course, we think it would be in combination with looking at the EDAM and thinking or making enhancements to whether or not we can co-optimize the AS with energy for the entire EDAM, which we don't do in the EDAM that's proposed now, but I've sort of always said that might be a future enhancement we'll look at. So it's a little bit ambiguous exactly what we would be looking at right now in that replacement reserve category. But that's generally the intention, is that are there market enhancements or developments we need to make in preparation for moving the entire EDAM towards a nodal AS type procurement? And that's what we'd be looking at there.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just say before moving to Stuart, you know, like part of the working group process is that we're not trying to necessarily presume the need for any of these things, or you know, that's what the working groups are for. But we do have to, the ISO does have to provide a little bit of structure about what exactly we're, you know, trying to scope out. So it is going to be a little bit ambiguous, and that's what the working groups are for, to work out what exactly we move forward with in terms of policy. But these are sort of just intended to be umbrella items, and I hope that that's fair. You can move to the next caller.
Election was similar to mine when it came to fast start pricing, and I just wonder if it's better for fast start pricing just to do the data analysis first rather than get into working group prep and conducting working groups. To me, it makes more sense that CAISO demonstrate there is a need to even consider fast start pricing at this stage. And then just more generally, kind of building on Lindsay's point as well, do we not at some point need to kind of step back here and just look at the products in the market and just see, you know, is there gaps, you know, such as fast start pricing, or is there indeed, are we starting to see some overlap as we start to, you know, deal with different challenges in the market and have refined existing products, brought in some new enhancements through EDAM and all that good stuff. Are we clear where we're going with the various product offerings? That's just some feedback.
Yeah, good question. So I'll start with the second, well, more of a comment, the second comment about, you're absolutely right, the market evolves faster than we can plan for on this slide, right? And so you're absolutely right that it could very well be possible that, you know, exactly what's bucketed here isn't what eventually, you know, plays out, where different things may be prioritized or deprioritized, or we have new problems that may find its way under the umbrella price formation, and we want to prioritize it when they come about. Enhancements for EDAM potentially that we want to fit in here. So, you know, it's a fair comment, and you know, this is the best that we can plan for at this time, but we'll certainly be open over time as needs arise to maybe look, you know, more holistically at what's happening here. And so that holistic discussion is part of why the schedule is designed the way it is, where, as I was explaining in the beginning, we don't want to get too far into any specific topic. You know, you'll notice, like, if you look at the final proposal for scarcity pricing and BA level market power, when that's happening concurrently, we'll already be working on policy for phase 2 items and doing working groups for phase 3 items, so that the intention there is that you're not going to get left behind. You're not going to be, hopefully not developing policy in phase 1 that becomes outdated the minute phase 2 comes in or phase 3 comes in, right? So we are hoping to sort of establish some continuity there. And I think that will address what your concern is. Now, your first question was about fast start pricing. So we'll talk a little bit more about specifically the working groups for fast start pricing, but the output of the first phase in terms of fast start pricing will be an ISO produced analysis. Now, we want that to be informed by stakeholders, to the extent they have feedback on the types of things they want the ISO to be looking at in this type of analysis. That's what the working group in phase 1 on fast start pricing will be focused on, is providing the ISO with that type of feedback and collaboration on that. Of course, we have some ideas, and we'll be participating in that process like everybody else, but give stakeholders an opportunity to sort of elaborate on what they'd like to see, because you're absolutely right that we need to form the empirical basis for and justification for it before moving into the policy. Stakeholders want to see that, and ultimately FERC will want to see that. And so that's sort of why we phase it the way we have to produce that sort of analysis before working on the policy. So let me know if you have any reaction or feedback to what I just said.
Yeah, that sounds fair, James. Can you hear me okay? I was had problems unmuting there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's really just to set the framework for the analysis and fast start pricing. That's why you're stakeholdering. That makes complete sense. And in terms of the first response, yeah, I get it. But thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Next, we have Tyrone from PGE. Go ahead. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Tyrone from PG&E. Thanks for taking my question. Appreciate the slide that you have up here. One thing I wanted to ask about specifically, James, is the timing. I think on a later slide you talk about the timing potentially of a straw proposal for phase one for end of this year. But I'm just wondering if there are any overlapping timing concerns for the remaining phases connected to any of the other initiatives, whether that's EDAM or anything of that nature. So just trying to get I see you got the schedule here in the format, which makes sense, but are there any other kind of like, I think the word might be timing constraints that may affect how you all go about with phase two, phase three, and how, all those things may kind of layer together. Can you share anything on that? Thanks.
Sure. So for better or for worse, what this picture is missing is a left-hand column that would show the dates of each of these things. And I took it out. I took it out of this picture because I wanted to, while it would be helpful to answer your question, what I wanted to demonstrate here is that we're not planning to be locked in necessarily to a rigid timeline, in the sense that, and you'll see on the next slide, I'll explain, like, some of these working groups are going to take a serious amount of time and effort. Some of the working groups may not, and we need to be flexible in terms of allowing the conversation to play out the way it needs to feel like we're at a good place before forming the straw proposal. And for some topics, that may be a lot of meetings, and for some topics, it may not be. And same with the actual proposal development. We all know that, we like to have these straw proposals produced and worked on in these, nice increments where a few months goes by, you get the next proposal. Sometimes it's challenging because, you have complications can arise where you need to spend more time, working on a specific proposal where, say, a revised straw proposal takes 6 months to write rather than 3 months like you would hope. And so that sort of thing, those sort of things happen. So I hope you'll see this sort of as a framework, as, sort of what we're trying to accomplish without necessarily boxing us into specific dates. Now, I will share, there are some near-term milestones we'll want to achieve, right? And you mentioned some of them. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. And generally, the other milestone that might be helpful is that for phase one and phase two items, these are both items that we see as being implemented after EDAM and after day-ahead market enhancements. So, the year after EDAM, that would be roughly the timing that we're seeking. And so you could sort of use, hopefully that provides a better sense of like, okay, well, this is, maybe when the ISO is targeting having these enhancements built into the software. And of course, we can't manage, DAM and EDAM are plenty enough to work on for everybody. We can't manage adding more to the plate here. So that's why, some of these things are intended to be built into the software after EDAM and DAM are put into the market. So, we're looking at maybe a 3 to 4 year time horizon for, these to go into effect. And then, I'll certainly be providing some near-term milestones. But I hope that's a fair response to your question. Okay, let's move to the next slide, slide 7. Thanks everybody for your comments. I really appreciate the feedback and questions. So let's talk a little bit about working group structure and schedule. We're going to have, on the next slide, we're going to have Juan Butrago from our stakeholder engagement group sort of walk through the next slide. But this slide, I just wanted to talk about some of the, we'll call it a framework about what we think the working group structure and schedule for price formation specifically will look like for phase one. Now again, this slide describes the phase 1 working group and cadence only. And when phase 2 comes about, we will, re-communicate with stakeholders, what that might look like. And we want to be as flexible as possible. We have ideas about the proper cadence, but we do really want stakeholder feedback to let us know when things become too intense, or if things are not intense enough, we're losing momentum week to week. We're looking for that. So let's start with number 1 in terms of the topics. We're actually going to planning to hold 2 working groups here. So one would be the scarcity pricing and MPM topic bundled into one working group, and then a second separate working group working on the fast start pricing analysis. Now, working groups are by nature open to all stakeholders, so there's not like a sign-up sheet or a committee process to join these working groups. I mean, they're open to the public. You can listen in or not listen in if you want. But what the expectation will be is if you want to be sort of an active participant in these working groups, we'll have sort of the defined schedule where if you're a stakeholder that particularly cares about, the fast start pricing analysis, but not so much about the other pieces, where and when to focus your time and effort. But of course, everybody's welcome to participate in any of these working groups as they see fit. So the cadence that we are proposing here is first to kick off the first week of August. So that gives stakeholders about a month to prepare for if you're like Perry and you want to give a presentation about scarcity pricing, or you have material or perspectives that you want to share as a stakeholder with the working group. It gives you about a month to come up with that. Gives you plenty of time to think about what you might want to say and what your perspective might be, prepare you to engage in these working groups appropriately. We're planning at this point to hold weekly meetings that are 2 hours each. Some working groups, like if you're participating in IPE, those are all-day meetings. We're trying to play around with how often the working groups meet and how long they meet. We think for this initiative, weekly meetings for only a 2-hour stretch makes sense, and just keeps everybody focused and productive during that time. But at the same time, the weekly part of it we think is necessary, because if you spread out the meetings too long, you lose momentum, you lose inertia, you forget what you talked about. And so we do think once a week is the right intensity and cadence to make sure that we have progress moving forward each week to week. Now, in terms of approach, we're actually going to be doing one working group at a time. So here's how it will work. We'll start with scarcity pricing and market power mitigation the first week of August, and we are going to continue that working group until it reaches its sort of concluding point. And then once it reaches that concluding point, we'll start with fast start pricing analysis within that bucket of time that you saw on the previous screen. So we are only going to be working on one topic focus at a time, and that is also intentional in the sense that we don't want both the ISO staff and stakeholders to having to be switching back and forth between topics. We have one focus at a time. We can focus all our attention onto that and then move on to the next topic when we're finished. So in terms of deadlines, we are hoping to complete the phase 1 working groups. That's both the scarcity pricing MPM working group and the fast start pricing analysis working group by the end of October, which gives us, after the working groups launch in August, about 3 months. 3 months because we are hoping, one of our goals is to issue a straw proposal for scarcity pricing and MPM and an analysis report for fast start pricing by the end of 2023. So by wrapping up the working groups in October, we'll have November, December for the ISO team to produce the outputs of the straw proposal and the report by the end of the year. Now, the last bullet explains that. I want to be really clear that these are soft constraints. Okay, these are goals, but as I was explaining to Tyrone from the last slide, we're planning to be flexible and hold as many or few working group sessions as needed to accommodate all stakeholders' viewpoints. And some working group processes might take longer than others. So for example, we're not going to say we're going to do 6 working groups on scarcity pricing, 6 on fast start pricing. It could be that we need 10 on scarcity pricing and 3 on fast start pricing, or vice versa. We're just going to sort of play it by feel, but at the same time, we're putting these goals out there because we don't want them to be open-ended. We don't want them to draw out forever. By having these goals as sort of soft constraints, it leads both ISO and stakeholders towards progress and then towards a common goal. So we're not just talking ad infinitum forever about the same topic. So so again, think of them as soft constraints. Working groups, and hopefully we'll wrap up by the end of October. If the situation arises where we need to go past October, we'll do so. If the situation arises where we can wrap up in September, we'll do that too. And so we'll be accommodating to however sort of the organic process of the working groups play out. Before I turn it over to Juan for slide 8, are there any questions on this slide from the team?
I do not see any questions in the queue. I don't see any questions in the phone-only line queue either.
Okay, I'll pass the mic to Juan Buitrago, who will go through the rest of the slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juan Buitrago, and currently I will be the facilitator for the Price Formation Enhancement Working Groups. I think James did a wonderful job encapsulating what it is that we're wanting to accomplish within the working group structure as opposed to the past workshops that we've had. So just wanted to cover a couple of items as far as the roles within these working groups as it is, kind of an introduction of a new concept into the stakeholder engagement model here at the ISO. So as James mentioned, it was pretty heavily leveraged on the extended day ahead market initiative, and we really felt like that led to very robust engagement on those topics and ultimately a very successful end product. So given the importance of this initiative, we felt that it would benefit from the working group concept. So what you see here on your screen right now are the 3 roles within this new working group structure. As a facilitator, that is currently the role that I will be serving. So the facilitator's role will be to kind of guide that discussion, solicit that feedback coming from an unbiased place, right? And really drive towards the resolution of issues and towards those deliverables or those soft constraints, as James put it in the previous slide. We'll also have a scribe. Now, that's not to say that these sessions will not be recorded, but a scribe will be there to capture that discussion, the evolution of those conversations, and capture any action items so that we can make sure we keep that momentum, as James put it, and how important that is towards an initiative's development. And then the working group participants, arguably the most important, and that is all of you. And what we're really seeking from you is we want to hear your ideas, your input. We'd like to vet things with you for the refinement of the guiding principles, the problem statements, your proposals. We want to hear from you and give the time in order, the time in the forum rather, in order for you to put forth those proposals throughout that working group structure there. So if we could go ahead and just quickly move to the next slide here. I want to talk to you a little bit about what the working group deliverable will be, and what we're envisioning is really an action plan. So that would be authored by the scribe, the facilitator, and the policy lead. And that's really the end result or the work product, so to speak, of these working groups. And it's going to summarize all the different viewpoints that were discussed through those sessions, as well as all the action items that we kind of formulated together through that working group structure. And what those action items are going to do is really kind of serve as the basis for that straw proposal, or in the case for fast start pricing, in this case, the scoping of what that analysis should look like. And the stakeholder community at large will also have an opportunity not only to participate in the working group itself for the formation of this working group action plan, but once that is authored, we will post that and you'll be able to provide written comments on the action plan itself. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So, of course, you can visit the initiative webpage for more information here, but we would really like to hear from you guys both by asking any questions here in this meeting or by providing written comments on the working group structure itself. Please feel free to contact Brenda Corona or ISO Stakeholder Affairs at kaiso.com. We welcome your feedback. We're excited at this opportunity for a new engagement point with you guys through this working group structure. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Brenda.
Thank you, Juan. As he noted, right now, we're not taking any formal comments in the commenting template. So we do encourage any comments ahead of time. Feel free to route those to either myself or the ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and we will be reviewing those before the starting of our working groups. But I do see a question that just popped up from Sibley from Public Generating Pool. If that's something, let's go ahead and take your question. If James, you're available, I see you on mute just in case. Go ahead.
There we go. Hi, this is Sybil from PGP. I just wanted to clarify in the sequential approach that you were talking about with handling one topic and then the other. Does that mean that you are going to choose between the scarcity pricing, market power mitigation, and fast start, or are you the fast start analysis, or are those still happening in parallel, meaning there would be 2 weekly meetings covering both of those at the same time?
No, that's a good question. So it would be one topic at a time. James, please feel free to jump in. It would be one topic at a time, so that one weekly meeting. But I think, as James alluded to, kind of leaving it open-ended. You know, the purpose of these working groups is just to enhance that feedback loop with our stakeholders. So I think it's something that we could explore if we need to increase, right? So James, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, maybe if we can move to slide 6, it might help answer the question. So you can see in the green that there's sort of a block for conducting working groups of time. Now, basically what I meant to describe in the sequential approach is that within that block of time, we're going to do one topic at a time. You know, we'll start with the scarcity pricing NPM, and then we'll move into the fast start pricing analysis, and with the goal of trying to wrap up both of them by the end of October. Now, as we explained, the purpose of that is that there's sort of 2 reasons. One is that there are going to be stakeholders that are interested in both topics, and we felt like it was a little overwhelming potentially for having both the scarcity pricing NPM working group and the fast start pricing working group going on at the same time. Harder to plan from the ISO's perspective. You got to have meeting time. It's just more work, and we just felt like having one topic focus at a time was the best path forward. Secondly, we don't know how many meetings we're going to need. So from our perspective, it was tough to say, like, okay, we're going to do a month and a half of this working group and a month and a half of this one, when it quite possibly could be that, you know, some of the working groups might need to take more time than we think, or less time than we think. And so what the sequential approach allows us to do is to say, okay, we're going to focus on scarcity pricing NPM. We're going to put all of our effort into there. When the working group sort of concludes organically, we'll transition to fast start pricing, and we'll pick it up from there. Hopefully that entire process takes 3 months, but if it takes longer, we'll certainly consider that. So I hope that, let me know if that helps, Sybil.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was what I understood, but yes, thank you very much.
Are there any other stakeholder questions before we conclude?
I don't see any. Michelle, will there be any on audio only?
No questions.
Great, thanks. So at this time, we are just wrapping up the meeting, and we also would like to share that we do have an Energy Matters blog that is posted monthly that shows all recent article that's posted. So feel free to visit that for more information that involves with the ISO. But other than that, we thank you so much for everyone who attended. We had a peak about 131 attendees today. So that recording of this video will be uploaded shortly within a week. And feel free to share that video to your colleagues as we kick off our working groups pretty soon. So thanks so much for your attendance, and I'll pass it back to Michelle to close our meeting. Thanks, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.